Hi there guys, my name's Jake Nielsen. Over the next couple of minutes I'm going to be going over the Ciba allied colloid acquisition for you, just kind of giving you a rundown on some major points here, and I'm going to explain a couple of questions. So the first question that this assignment asked us to complete was what caused allied colloids to become a possible takeover target? And there were a number of things that attributed to their eventual takeover, and the first thing was that it mainly operates in a really niche market within the chemicals industry. And if you look at the company, they specialize in water treatment and paper technology. So those are two really specific areas within chemicals that not a lot of companies are going to compete with. So with very few competitors, you have a lot of these big conglomerates looking to diversify their business, and it's a good takeover target because not a lot of people have this technology, and it looks really good for a lot of these big companies to come in and add to their business. And it offers them a high margin area of specialization that they probably wouldn't be able to use if they used research and development. This, coupled with the fact that the company was performing pretty poorly over the last few years, it seems like they underperformed the market by about 38% prior to their acquisition. And in the face of the strong pound and rising materials prices, they were just having a hard time managing their margins, and eventually it was decided that management would benefit from an acquisition. This brings us to the second question: is how does Ciba value the gains from the merger after it's completed? And Ciba seek to basically diversify their business by acquiring alloyed colloids. So the main benefit from the merger was that they were able to gain this water technology and paper technology. And it states in the articles that they had actually been looking for a company like this for the last 18 months. So this kind of competitive takeover offered them a really good opportunity to jump in and buy a company even though they purchased it for way too much. The company was also expecting that once the merger fell through or was completed, that the cost savings from the synergies would ultimately benefit the company's margins in the long run. And even though this doesn't really come to fruition within the first couple of years, that was definitely the hope prior to the merger. Finally, it really gives Ciba an access to a new, really high-growth, high-margin market. There's not a lot of companies, like I said, that were producing this water-soluble technology. So it's really high-growth, high-margin, a lot of money to be made in these growth segments, and they actually said it could have been one of the company's top 5 performance segments over the next 4 years. Another benefit, too, that goes pretty overlooked sometimes is that the two company cultures really meshed really well. It says both companies had a strong culture for environmental sustainability and had kind of the same morals and principles about environmental exploration as each other, which is good because you want all the employees to kind of have the same goal and be working to the same thing over time. You don't want those two things to be different, otherwise it causes tension in the workplace and you can't actually realize the new cost savings that you're expecting. And then finally, through the merger and acquisition, the company was actually able to reach its target capital structure. Before the merger, it says that the company was only leveraged up to about 18 times, and then after the merger, it's leveraged up to 80 times. So it allowed it to achieve that target capital structure through just one purchase. And that leads us right to our next question: is how does the merger affect Ciba's balance sheet? And first off, like I just mentioned, is the merger ultimately led to Ciba having an extreme amount of debt after the mergers, like I said, from 18% to about 80%. But this is stated that the company was actually looking to make this new capital structure, and it was actually a good thing for the company, even though it eventually leads down to them getting a downgraded credit rating. Next, it added about $2.2 billion in goodwill, and even though that goodwill is going to be amortized over the next several years, it's going to create a huge expense on the balance sheet from a one-time purchase that is going to have to, it'll benefit them as a cash flow item later on, but also it's going to depress earnings for the next several years, and those one-time charges are really going to hurt earnings in the next couple of years, and unless they can improve their margins from the cost synergies, that goodwill is not really justified on the balance sheet. Third, it added another $1 billion in research and development costs that were already in process. So the company essentially had to take those on once they acquired the firm. And again, that's acquiring another expense that's going to hurt earnings in the current year, and you would hope to see improving margins in the next few years, even though we don't really see that happen in the articles here. And that brings us to our next question here, which is who is basically the winner and who's the loser of this whole deal? And so the kind of unexpected winner here is really Allied Colloids. In a time when the company had a depressed stock price and really was underperforming, they kind of just got saved by these two companies that were competing. Essentially, one company comes in and they offer them a really good deal that's way above what their fair value should be. And then Ciba comes in and is able to even offer on top of that. So really shareholders essentially benefited by pretty much doing nothing. And overnight they doubled their share price, which is definitely good for their shareholders. Second, the merger prevented layoffs for Allied Colloids. One thing that the company had talked about was that they were afraid that they were going to have to lay off employees in order to improve margins. And then the merger basically made it so that never had to happen. And lastly, it gave Allied Colloids new access to global markets, new funding through Ciba, which will allow it to expand its operations. And if it gets spun off eventually, they'll be in a good position from there. And then from the acquisition, we can definitely identify two losers here. The first of these, and really we're not sure if Ciba is a total loser from the deal, but at least right after the merger, it looks like they're not. The merger ultimately dramatically depressed their earnings because of the overpayment for the company. So all this extra goodwill and all the big purchase here doesn't actually they don't actually realize the cost savings and synergies from it until later on down the road and before they get sold out. So the benefits of the merger never really outweighed the costs for Ciba. And then it also led to their credit rating getting downgraded by Moody's, which actually hurt them based on other mergers that they were seeking at the time later on down the road. And then with rising materials costs and rising energy costs, created an unstable future where they weren't actually able to improve their margins, which was the goal of the acquisition from the get-go. Finally, the last one that might get overlooked every now and then is the fact that Hercules at the time was kind of a loser as well. They were really trying to jumpstart their business and get a catalyst by acquiring Allied Colloids, but they were never able to do it, and it ultimately led to them getting bought out by another company later on down the road. And then the last question kind of asks us to do a little follow-up on what Ciba is doing now and what has happened to the company since this acquisition. And in 1998, in the winter of 1998, the company sought to acquire another company called Clariant. And Clariant, the deal with Clariant, it lasted for about a month, and then the deal fell through, and this was about the same time that they were getting their credit rating downgrade. So once that deal falls through, it's kind of ironic that Ciba becomes basically in the same position that Allied Colloids was when they got acquired, and they really look like they're a struggling firm. And eventually BASF, a German company, comes to their rescue and offers them a selling price of about 30% over their current stock price. The company's forced to sell out based on the fact that materials costs and energy costs are rising, and the company's not able to improve their margins. It also states that before they get bought out, that the quarter before they actually reported a net loss of about 606 million Swiss francs. So the company was never really able to bring themselves out from that overpayment, and continually their stock price had been depressed since. And so pretty much they just become in the same position as Allied Colloids and become a takeover target from there. Well, I hope you guys gained some positive insight from the Ciba case here, and you can get some more information if you need it later on.